as a place of honesty and discipleship. So, is everybody okay with that? Yeah. And it will be important for people to catch up on as well. Obviously, quite a lot of the session calls and explain how the session will work, quite a lot of it is discussion around the table, so I'm not quite sure how that will work for you guys. Hopefully, that there's sure so that you can be implementing that and it will work. So what we're looking at, we started off thinking about this as a day to look at the review of the Charities legislation, which is, but we wanted to do that in a wider context, which is about charity brand and incorporating why trust levels in charities are reducing, even though they're still really high. But that is one of the things that Oscar particularly say we want to address through this review of the legislation. So from our perspective, we do a lot of work at SCU around what is a modern charity, what do the public understand by charity, and we're going to show you our video which illustrates that just in a moment to get us started. So we want to really explore with you what people's perceptions are of a charity, what could be better, what could we use this legislation or this review of legislation to get over in a wider context, because at the moment what's come out from Scottish Government is very much kind of tweaking of the current legislation, tweaking making things a wee bit better. Do we want to that's fine? Do we want it to go further than that? And if it is to go further than that, this session will help us how that might be. So incorporating into that as well is what is the role of the charity regulator. We have a different kind of approach to regulation in Scotland to what they have in the rest of the UK. I just saw a report this morning which said that for people, Association of Chief Executives of Volunteer Organisations who are England based, but they had done a study along with a proposal which said that in Northern Ireland and Scotland, the trust of the charity regulator is higher and it's more positively viewed than in England. Whether that is relevant to this discussion, I don't know, but I thought it was quite interesting. So I'm going to ask Paul to sort of run through what exactly we're going to do today, but at the end of this session, I would like us to have some kind of advice from you about where you'd like us to go in terms of our response to the charity legislation review, and anything else that you think would be helpful to really build that brand of what's a modern charity and why should the public trust the charity sector. Does that make sense?
Hi everyone, thanks for coming on today. It was a little bit excessive having a microphone. It's just a small group, and we're really pleased that those of you who couldn't are here today. The session that I've pulled together for us to go through as small groups really is about kind of teasing out discussion amongst us all, what we feel is important for building and maintaining trust in the charity brand in Scotland. As Anna said, at the end of the day, we feel that is a role, one of the roles that the regulator also should play, and in fact there needs to be a broader review of the charity role in Scotland to ensure that it's fit for purpose over the next 10, 15 years. The session that's technology. So the first session we're going to be going through is going to be chaired by Richard Sharp, and we'll call this the 5 Whys. This exercise is going to be all about chain of questions, where we're going to try and build discussion amongst ourselves about why is important for the third sector, why is it important for charities to have a clear identity, a clear brand, what role should also be playing in supporting that, and issues around public trust as well. So Richard is going to go through that in a moment. We're then going to move on to test your drawing skills. I'm sure some of you have done this before. We're going to delve a little bit deeper into what's the charity brand mean to people in communities across Scotland. And I think that's one of the most important parts of having a clear, strong brand for the charities in Scotland. So there's going to be there's 2 worksheets per table. In the groups and graphs we've split up, and then we're going to have there's some of the have been identified already, government, service user, member of the public, and we're going to go through that together and try and come up with what we think people might see charities as in Scotland. After that, we're going to have a bit of a break, and then we're going to move on to some of the challenges that charities face, or will we face as a group, in terms of building and maintaining trust in the charity brand. I'm going to be asking you to note down as many of those challenges as possible, and then as a group, I'm going to want you to decide democratically what the main challenge you think is for charities in Scotland when it comes to having a clear identity and shared brand. And I'm going to take you through this table where you're going to develop your own solutions for how the charity brand can be maintained and built with stronger in Scotland. And this will feed into our consultation response to Oscar over the next few weeks. And we'll be publishing our draft response over the next few days. We'll be seeking wider comments and specific questions to the consultation, but also the broader focus that we're trying to tailor our consultation response around. So before I hand over to Rashid on the 5 whys, I'm just going to play our recently produced video on what is the modern charity.
Most people think we have a pretty good understanding of what charities are and what we do. And when 4 out of 5 people used the charity last year, a quarter of them really had. So there's a good chance the modern charity sector might not be quite what you imagined. The modern charity sector is diverse. It covers everything from the local village hall, mother baby group and sports club, to advice services, health and social care organisations, campaigns to bring about change, and so much more, all working towards a common aim to make our communities better places to live, making society fairer and more equal, enabling everyone to contribute and enjoy a better quality of life. In the modern age, charities work to change our lives for the better in so many ways. Fundraising for those in need, undertaking cutting-edge medical research, pushing positive change, and defending human rights. While over 1 million people volunteer over 100 million hours of their time every year, Scotland's 40,000 plus charities and voluntary organisations simply couldn't carry out their work without skilled employees. A quarter of Scotland's charities have paid staff. That's over 100,000 people in total, or 1 in 25 jobs, making the charity sector a major employer. And charities are so effective at the work they do that the government and local councils now commission specialist charities to provide some of the services we all rely on. Modern charity is about so much more than the rich and the poor. It's about people and communities who come together to address their own needs. It's about organisations that do important work in our communities to improve lives rather than make profit. And it's about campaigns that fight for fairness and equality. We think the work of modern charity is worth celebrating. Share this video to show your support for charities in Scotland.
Okay, hope you found that video interesting. It's been quite exciting for us. So the exercise that Paul's asked me to do is just take you through a series of 5 questions, which kind of leads us into, in a gentle way, leads us to think about the charity brand and what needs to be a charity in Scotland. So if I could ask Paul, I think we probably need one sheet on that table as well when you're ready. But the way I was hoping to do this is to take a few minutes to each table, just to go through each question in turn, and then we'll come back and go through it. After each part, it's kind of like a sense of it. You understand what I mean once you get going. But the first question really is why do we think having this discussion of charity brands is important in the first place? Why do we need to have it? Is that right, Paul?
Yeah, why is a comprehensive review of Scottish charity law needed?
Yeah, why? So the question is why do we want to look at this in the first place? We've not actually done this since 2005, which is when the Scottish charity law was enacted in Scotland. And since then, the Charities Act has been taking place in a number of other countries as well.
across the UK, but we were kind of pioneering this in Scotland. So let's start off with this question. Why shouldn't we be having this conversation in the first place? Why should we have this comprehensive? So if I could ask each table to maybe take a few minutes, you might want to just introduce yourself to begin with, but if you just spend maybe 5 minutes exploring this question, and then we'll take a break.
Can I just realise I didn't do that kind of ear hostess bit at the beginning? So you'll have spotted there's food out there if you want it. I grabbed the cake, Paul and I grabbed the cake just in case I got cleared away from the cake. The toilets are down the stairs, and the fire escapes are totally evident, but there's no planned fire alarm, so we will know if it happens, and we will do what we're told by the NEC staff. And there is a handy little patio out there for those of us that like to pitch here at the break. So that was my excuse for getting.
Okay, so we're all one group here. I'm just going to switch cameras. There's 3 people joining us.
For you to sit seconds.
Yeah. And I'm just going to show you all.
That's comparison. I just saw the people online, they haven't got it.
No, it's fine. So if anybody can't hear me, just let me know, but I'm just typing in the question here so that you can see it. Why is this review of charity law in Scotland important? Okay. So, why is a comprehensive review of Scottish charity law needed? So shall we just do a quick intro first? And is that okay? Yeah. Just remember we're being streaming on YouTube, so if you don't want to say anything, it's fine.
My name is Norma Austin Hart, and I'm Chief Executive of the Third Sector Interface in Dumfries and Galloway.
Thanks.
Hi, my name is Ian Rook. I'm Deputy Chief Executive of Edinburgh Voluntary Organisations Council, EVOC, partner in Edinburgh's Third Sector Interface.
My name is Paul Bradley. I work for the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations, and most of my work relates to sustainable development goals and open government, but also some work on charity law as well.
And my name is Ruchir Shah, Head of Policy at SCVO. Do people want to come in online? Could I maybe first go to Caroline? Have you got, can you introduce yourself, Caroline? Are you okay to do that? Either by typing or by speaking, whichever you prefer. Okay, maybe Sue. Sue, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. I'm Sue Rawcliffe. I'm Engagement Manager with our Guiding Butte Third Sector Interface.
Brilliant, thank you.
I stayed at home because the weather's bad.
Okay. But thanks for joining anyway, though. I appreciate that. And we'll see how this goes. And Anne-Marie?
Is anyone there?
Anne-Marie, are you there? I think you need to unmute yourself if you want to speak, Anne-Marie. Okay. And Caroline, have we got you now? Or can I just double check? No, okay, that's fine. If you want to say something, just type it into the chat and we'll be watching it here carefully to make sure we catch it. So any point to raise. Okay, great. Okay, let's get this off then. So who wants to go first? Why do you feel that this comprehensive review of Scottish charity law is needed?
It's a bit of a leading question as well, because part of this, obviously there is a review taking place right now. Do we think it's comprehensive enough? Does it need to be more comprehensive?
So one thing at a time. Well, we're not shy, are we? I suppose one of the main reasons that the review is needed is because the role of the voluntary sector has changed significantly in the last 15 years. And its potential to support government aims and objectives has changed. So it's become much more important to in political terms.
I'd probably follow your lead a bit forward and say, well, this isn't a comprehensive review.
Oh, right.
So it's a sort of almost like a mid-term refresh. And having waited for 14 years for such a momentous moment, it's a little bit sort of half-hearted.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, same feeling here.
Yeah, it feels to me slightly tinkering on the edges. Tidying things up a little bit.
I mean, it's interesting because they previously tinkered around the edges in 2010. There was a Miscellaneous Provisions Act using that horrible language for Parliament, and it changed quite a few things and tidied up several aspects of the 2005 Act then, but there was no massive consultation, there was no big jamboree. And this time around, I think people were hoping it wasn't going to be repeated 2010, which it more or less is. But it's been built to be something much bigger and stronger than I think personally than it maybe ought to be.
Right. I don't agree.
And if we ask ourselves why a comprehensive review is needed, then why now? Because we're in quite a turbulent time generally. So is this really a good time to be looking at this kind of thing? Why now? Or should we wait a few more years before things settle?
Well, I would imagine it's quite a good practice to review these things on a regular cycle. I don't know what that cycle is, if it's 5 years or 10 years. But I think I'm right in saying 2010 was the last time there was any legislative changes. It was 9 years, it was 9 years since the previous one.
Yes, even that's such a long time ago.
Yeah.
So much has changed, especially in terms of digital and how people access services, and also in terms of how people judge things based on what they read in the news, but they don't just read normal news now, they read things on social media, and all those kind of things are quite new in terms of when this act was brought in 2005-06.
So what you're saying is the questions are all a bit technical and dull and keeping them on, are they on the register or are they not? There's published accounts or do they not? And that's all a bit.
Well, regardless of our personal opinions, there's a big debate out there, isn't it, about what is charity, what are charitable purposes, whether or not it's religion, whether it's the welfare of animals, whether or not it's private schools. There's all that controversial stuff that's regularly in the press, that's regularly in social media, etc., about charity and the benefits that label bestows upon your organisation, and rightly so.
Yeah.
This isn't touched at all.
It's significantly about Oscar.
Indeed, and
which is okay, but not very, as you say, very.
And maybe for Oscar, it's not about legislation. Maybe it's the application of the legislation by the regulator itself in terms of how it performs its duties, not what the duties and powers are of the legislation.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel as though that's part of this conversation either.
And I think the other thing is the conversation has already started in the media. So there are questions being raised about to what extent charities are genuine, to what extent they're betraying trust. There's a lot of very negative coverage of charities in the UK.
Over the last £1 million a minute. Exactly.
So the conversation has already started.
Yeah.
It's a case of, well, we actually need to get into this before the conversation goes beyond any,
Into the details.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I was thinking on the train through this morning, and when you hear about a bad story, something in the press, or how people talk about charities, they often do talk about not an individual charity, but charities. They kind of clump us all together into one. And I think that's a real risk for the sector, because people aren't distinguishing between a few bad apples and lots and lots of really great organisations. Whereas if you look at the private sector, people do tend to kind of mention the organisations in question. When it comes to charities, I feel like we are trying to clump into one space, and for me, that's why it's so important that there is strong regulation in place to protect space.
Does anybody online want to chip in at this point? We're ready to watch if you type that. There we go. So, Sue, I think we do need to get into it, but maybe our discussion is being limited by the proposals being those that have come from Oscar. I think that's quite right.
Maybe so.
Yeah, absolutely. But I don't think, to be honest, I don't think they ever intended it to be more than a technical consultation. So I think we have come into this. Also, I think we were kind of it was hinted by the Scottish Government that they wanted to look in a bit more depth at what charities were doing. I think that was off the back of some of the scandals around trust. So they have been reactive to some extent. And the question for us is, well, maybe we need to be a bit more, we need to push it to be a bit more proactive. It's not just about trying to stop scandals, but it's also about thinking about what charity means, trying to rebuild a much bigger trust in the brand itself, charities, which is something that maybe has gone lost a bit.
Sorry, I need to think about the question. So I'm not sure what the answer to this is, so I'll just pose it and then think about it after something. Is it the job of legislation to protect the brand of one or a group of charities?
I think it's part of the toolkit, isn't it?
Well, I'm just not sure it can do it.
You need that one part. You need a strong regulator that's prepared to act. You need a sort of group of individual organisations and people that hold something dear. You know.
Yes,
yeah.
But I'm not sure legislation can do it. I'm not even sure a regulator can do it. You know, these questions, none of the, even if you took the most rigorous approach to the role of Oscar, draconian approach, none of that's going to guarantee that an organisation will not.
Thank you. Plan for technology, but this is the last thing you expect.
We've had a slight problem with it.
Keep going.
So that's my just thinking about what you said. No matter how rigorous these, it's not going to protect against it. But I don't know if there are other powers that Oscar could have that would help. That aren't mentioned here.
I don't think that there's anything in here you'd fundamentally object to. I think that a lot of this is probably enabling powers and legislation that hopefully stops the situation that Oscar finds itself in sometimes, where the horse is bolted or the people you want don't fall within a very strict definition. Or, there's lots of stuff in there. But the wider conversation, I don't think it's happening anywhere.
How about, I guess, so I read this consultation paper and kind of what you said about this kind of moment, being able to reflect a bit on charities, their purpose, their role, and how to protect that space, the brand. But the consultation paper itself doesn't really provide the opportunity to even go into those discussions. And I think for me, that was a disappointing thing. I would have hoped that while we could focus on some more technical things as well, how could this consultation be used to galvanise people a little bit more around?
Hi all, can I suggest we take a quick pause there and just to kind of check in on the conversations. We're not going to do a detailed kind of feedback from all the tables, but it'd be just good to get a sense of the conversation from each table, just like the question of why we're doing this and why should we be doing this. Maybe if we start with Anna's table.
I really need to make sure that there's so many changes gone to GDPR fundraising with the third party. Also, we've had problems that social enterprises haven't met some of the definitions of enterprise. Proportionality of the issue, kind of information that's possible, I want you to correct. It's maybe not appropriate to follow a larger organisation that already reports to other regulators. So yeah, a lot more questions than answers.
Wow, okay.
We covered a lot of similar things as well.
Anything different?
That we can learn from other legislation, from other Charities Acts. We can learn from Oscar's experience. Societal, governmental, financial challenges and changes as well that have effect.
everything.
So for yourselves, was it kind of more bigger picture, connecting it with the changes going on? Okay. And who would like to speak from this?
Yeah, so we said that it's needed because the role of the voluntary sector has changed significantly since the Act came into force, and the sector plays a much more important role in terms of political terms now. It's been a 14-year or so wait, and kind of we were all building up expectations that this was going to be much more comprehensive and address some more critical questions and issues. But this hasn't really turned out to be the case. We also had a discussion about, is it the job of the legislation to protect the brand and reputation of charities? We were unsure whether or not Oscar would be able to have those kind of powers to do this, what those powers would be. But also we said that it's just one part of a wider toolkit to ensure that charity brands and charities operate in a correct way.
Okay, well, thanks very much for that. I mean, that leads us quite neatly into talking about the charity brand. I mean, this is a concept which has gone around a few times, but basically the idea that, you know, there is something of value in actually presenting our organizations, or those that choose to do so, as a charity, and it means something in the public sphere, and that's something that we need to protect. And I guess the question is, why do we agree with that? Why is it important for the sector to have a clear identity, or the charity sector to have a clear identity? Why is it important? Is it important for you? And if so, do we have that clear identity in Scotland, or is there a gap? Do we feel as though there is a strong enough brand for charities in Scotland, or do we feel there is actually more that can be done here? Do the public actually know what, when they hear what a charity is, do they know exactly what we think they should be doing, or are we fulfilling their expectations for what they think we should be offering as a charity? So another 5 minutes, and if we could maybe just start touching on the charity brand. You know, why, and do we have it in Scotland? And is there a gap?
So, is it Susan? Is it Susan on there? Yeah. Susan said, what do others think of the idea of a charity brand? So I guess that kind of fits in nicely with this question. Why is it important? Is it important? Do we need it? Is it possible to have all the questions again?
So, I suppose it makes me think about the politician's brand, and how there are so many politicians. The public tend to think of politicians as generically, you know, the scoundrels and self-seeking and generally not very good types. But we all probably know individually that there are individuals who don't think that. But whether individual politicians, if you make the comparison with charities, individual politicians, whether individual politicians can possibly take on the heft of public opinion. All they can do is try and do the best job that they can in the teeth of it. But whether or not it's really feasible to come up with a new brand for politicians, I think the answer is no, it's not. And I just wonder if there's some similarities. Maybe I'm stretching the comparison too far.
Susan says, my issue is whether it's possible covering such a wide range of different organisations. And I think that is one of the real highlights of our sector, is that it's so diverse and covers such a range of different issues.
I mean, personally, I think we've been challenged over the last few years, particularly with the introduction of arm's length external organisations that are run by local authorities. We've been challenged to think a little bit more about, well, where is the boundary between what is a charity and what is not a charity? I think the point that Sue raises, which is, you know, we're quite a diverse sector, so does it really make any sense? Is it possible to cover such a range of organisations? I mean, traditionally, charity has had a certain kind of image in the public, I would say. There's been surveys done of this and stuff. But maybe the idea of what charities is not quite the same as what we are now, have become as a sector. So maybe people's ideas of what a charity is still remains to some extent Victorian, whereas as a sector we have kind of moved on, and yet the
perception is still stuck a little bit of what a charity is based on that. And therefore, when we have media reports and scandals and so on, people say, well, how come you're not all volunteers? Or, how come you're paying so much to your staff? And why is it not going to the front line and all this kind of stuff? Maybe because there is that kind of dissonance between what people's expectations are, what charity is based on a Victorian idea, compared to what our sector has become, largely as a result of the increasing role we've played in service delivery on behalf of the state, I would say, but also the increasing campaigning activity that sector has been playing as well. So maybe, that's how it's been tested.
I'm completely ambivalent. If I'm honest. Okay, I really am. I think everything you say is right. That's a very good synopsis of where we're at. But hasn't it always been thus? It's interesting in the little video, can I just say, the little whole thing that's really missing from that is church. I don't know if that was a particular reason of missing churches off, because there's thousands of churches on the Scottish Charity Register.
Yeah. Oh, right,
They're all registered charities, and it plays a performance in the community, but it was interesting it wasn't in the video. No, I'm not in any way, I'm neither religious nor a proponent of religion being charitable, but it was interesting that, when you talk about modern charity, you chose not to focus on that, which tells a story in itself for me. And the bigger picture there for me would be that actually, you're not going to solve this question.
I think absolutely. Although individual charities or groups of charities can have develop their own brand, but creating a brand for the charity, I think it's about PR and organisations like yourselves, and to some extent ours, on behalf of our local sector, trying to communicate different messages and updating those messages, but whether it's worth investing in.
So I see brand, there's kind of two parts of brand. There's the marketing part, which is, a bit I think is very hard to get by for such a diverse group of organisations in terms of who your audience is, how you're going to go about that, and what you're going to actually design and deliver. But there's also what makes the brand, which is all the services and all the different roles that the sector provides. And I wonder whether, I've worked in the first sector for 5 years, not too long, but long enough time. Even I'm still confused by what makes a certain charity a charity. Why is that organisation a charity? Why? And I think that if that's confusing for us, then I imagine it'd be confusing for members of the public as well to understand.
It's interesting that, what was it, 25% didn't know that they weren't aware that the services that they'd used had come from a charity, like I suppose like a youth club.
Recycling service or whatever, It's really the only thing that is out there at the moment is you have the phrase, you're allowed to use the phrase, once you press the charity test, that you can't register you're a Scottish charity or a charity registered in Scotland, and here's my number. And also you do that thing now where you have that old thing, you click on your website, to your register entry.
Yes.
Which is the first attempt I've ever seen of doing something like that. It's quite interesting for a couple of years. Not been widely taken up, but some organisations use. So maybe focusing on that angle about, the state has decided that the things that you do should be treated differently to other people's things, and therefore that's the branding focus. I don't know.
Well, that's a great one to take us into that. Can I suggest we take a pause again? Sorry for moving us so fast, but we'll have more time to get into more depth on this later on in the conversation. Can I suggest we start with this table, just to reflect on charity brand? I mean, we had a slightly ambivalent kind of view of charity brands, but it'd be useful to cover that. Who wants to speak? Do you want this one?
Yeah, okay, good. Yeah, that's fine. Well, I think that the key takeaway for me was that whether or not this is even possible. Is it possible to have a charity brand? And we need to think about that a lot more, especially because of the diversity of the sector and what role that brand plays. And we got similar, it was likened to the brand of politicians. Lots of people now, if you ask to explain what politicians are like, it's probably quite negative. But that's not to say that every politician is like that, and actually the majority probably aren't. And it's probably impossible to change the brand of a politician in the short term. let alone the medium term. Is that the same for big issues such as this, charities or other organisations? We also discussed there's a certain type of image in the media around charity. Does this actually really represent what a modern charity is? And it was also mentioned that in our video that we played, that churches was missed off as a key area, not in the video on what a modern charity is. And there's a question about why that was the case.
Okay, let's go to the middle table.
We kind of mirrored what was said there about the huge diversity of the charitable sector. And it's difficult to necessarily have anything which can cover all of that. However, we wondered if your charitable registration with Oscar is something which underlines all of us, that we all have, which could be kind of starting point for identity and at least helping us to meet minimum standards, which is a good thing to convey to the public.
Well, I'll start off. So we talked about, I think as you talked about, there's different branding in terms of what the charity is. So we all have different brands, but what is charity is what we're looking at here. So charity is different from the charities, and what Oscar does is define that and bring that description. And we were trying to illustrate it by looking at if you've got different people or different organisations that all do the same thing, but they're in private sector, public sector, and third sector, then what is different about that same thing, same service delivery that in the charity sector? And we think it's about values. It's about, though obviously other sectors would say they have values too, which they do, but the non-profit and the discretionary effort of trustees and all that kind of thing. So what is the definition that makes it different? And just, I suppose, a bit about, I think you said earlier on this year, about is it anything to do with Oscar to look at I can't remember what you called it, like basically the brand, the charity brand.
Sorry, the computer crashed, so I've got the backup going. So the final question here is looking at why should Oscar play a more prominent role in finding and protecting the charity grant? And I would widen that out to say, why should the state play a broader role in protecting the charity grant? So if you could maybe just explore that for 5 minutes.
We just set them on the bed.
I have to say, when Anna said that, I thought Oscar in that way. I mean, I've only been doing my job for a year, so I'm relatively new to this, but I certainly haven't thought of them as an organisation that promotes the image and growth. Both image and value of that sector. I'm not saying they do the opposite.
No, it doesn't do that. No, I don't think
I'm just only going to want to suggest. Maybe they'll say they're under resourced. Certainly, they should. That does seem like an example.
I guess the issue around resource as well is that changes will require even more. So, well, they have to do that to fix the budget. Yes, they have. Because remember, it's a duty hospital. Every annual report they have to do. Particularly Scottish Ministers, these are the changes we would like to see in the charity law. It's part of their duties. They have to do that every year. I don't know if anybody's been through the 14 annual reports that Oscar's produced. Come up with a list of what they've said to Scottish Ministers and see what's reflected in this. Yeah. This goes from the executive, doesn't come from them. This comes from the charity law team in Victoria too. There were like a between Parliament between Oscar. So Oscar lobbies Victoria too. Who then go to Scottish Ministers of Ideas, who then come into Parliament. You know, it's really. So it's just Oscar that's involved in that process, though, rather than any other charities.
Yes.
It's just the regulator.
That explains why it's so technical and focused on Oscar.
This is not Oscar's.
Interesting. If they were taking seriously their role to promote the image and value of the charity, then they might have, I don't pick up anything about that in those questions.
No. Well, Oscar doesn't do politics. Private schools, we just apply the law.
Well, Susan said, while the state clearly has a role, our sector predates in many cases the state, so there is a role wider existing.
Yeah.
Yes, there is a role for one thing, but
society. So I guess, yeah, our question is into here. So obviously we're reviewing our strategic plan and everything about our governance. So there's an option there for us to do a different type of role. But I think it's what are the chapters' roles going to be?
Because all the last charities themselves, 24,000 charities, what's their view on their brothers and sisters within that grant?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, because we've got stuff about videos and private schools and so on. But I think that what's interesting is that come alongside conservation. They is all of my talks about this is about maintaining and building trust in charities and Scotland for a long-term basis. So I don't see how. I mean, there's some things in there that might make it simpler to keep an eye on trustees and other issues, but I don't really see how the public is going to benefit hugely from the changes that are represented in consultations.
So when a certain Sunday newspaper publishes a headline on its front page saying that 80% of money given to charities spent on taxes, that's a facetious book.
Yep.
You get the example.
Mhm.
Who is it who should turn around and say, well, the facts are actually A, B, and C, X, Y, and Z? That's protecting the brand, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a very functional, responsive thing. Now, SCVO's publicity press bit will do that, and I would imagine Oscar would have a press release to hand if they were asked for it. But where's the campaigning? It's responsive, that, isn't it? I don't know if that's what you guys are thinking, but
So you're saying that there needs to be a bit more of a campaign element to kind of counter the negative press.
To do it forward.
It's interesting you say that because, as I understand it, NCBO did that a year or so ago.
NCBO.
NCBO.
Oh, NCVO.
And it was kind of like the approach they were taking was, how do we kind of have a campaign basically to clarify what charity is and the things that charities are. I think they focused it more on civil society rather than charities. And it was very much to counter the other narratives that were coming through in the media at the time. At SCBO, we kind of took a slightly different approach. Rather than trying to counter the arguments, we would instead celebrate what charities are. And that's where the I Love Charity campaign came from. So that was we thought we'd take a positive approach to it, which seems to have worked for us because, but obviously the problem with that is the ones that celebrate the charity sector, people already supporting charities
know what it is.
Know what it is. So that's where this has come through. That's why we find that there's, we're not quite the general public getting the same kind of message as maybe we are getting with the sector's own audiences at the moment. And so what the video was about was very much trying to remind people, actually, even if you don't think about it, you are connecting to charity in everything you do every day. And so it's trying to reclaim the charity brand, I suppose. Some of that was coming from. Can I suggest we come back again? Sorry about the speed at which this is going. You can blame Paul. So this final conversation, which is looking at the role of the state, Oscar, Scottish Government, and so on, in deciding and defining what charities should be and to what extent we kind of saw that role playing through. Maybe if we start with this table first.
Sure, some of the stuff we've got, it's maybe not Oscar, but we need more of a campaigning approach maybe to counter certain narratives that are negative at the moment. Something about Oscar, the stuff in the consultation, mainly on the whole, we imagine comes from Oscar. As Oscar has a duty every year, it has to write a report that says we would like Scottish ministers to make these changes to the law. And they've done that. So it would be interesting if somebody went through the previous 14 annual reports that Oscar produced, where they will have to list them to see if that correlates with what's in the consultation. I haven't done it. I haven't had time. Might do it one weekend. Shouldn't other people be tipping? Shouldn't other people be sort of chipping into that sort of that pool of ideas and that pool of how do we change charity law to make it more modern? And I can't read that one. That's right. That one. To promote the value and the role of the third sector. Yeah, that's sort of like taking charity out of organisations and making it a thing. We had a conversation about that, but didn't reach a conclusion. That was interesting.
Okay.
So we put the why out of the question and talked about whether the state and Oscar should have a role in protecting and defining the charity brand. And then we had a quick discussion about what protecting actually meant and whether there was an element of control in there and whether that was a good thing or a bad thing, particularly looking at it from a public perspective. we had a quick conversation about regulation for cross-border charities and how different that would be and how that may impact on a charity brand. Anything else? Oh, and any conversation about defining protecting charity brand should be inclusive. It shouldn't just come from one direction, which I think is the point you're making, really.
Yeah, I mean, that's really helpful. Also, we spoke quite a lot about campaigning. Just one very particular perspective about challenging stereotyping in how charities perceived. But this is a really important point that if we rethink what the charity brand is, or we try and refine it further in Scotland, we're going to still have a problem if people see charities differently in England, in Wales, and Northern Ireland. And we have to take into account how charities are viewed in other countries and how it's being defined in other countries as well, because a lot of our campaigns cut across borders as well. So thanks for that. And thank you.
You want to answer this? We said that being a charity, it's sort of like being part of a membership body where you sign up to a code of conduct. And really that's what Oscar do already, but they're perhaps not communicating that well or defining it well. So whether they need to have a more prominent role or just need to communicate what they do better. We wondered about capacity issues as well with Oscar, and it was felt they already have a lot of the information, but they're not really using it the way they should. And then we felt that charity campaigning change societal attitudes, for example, gay rights, mental health, and then the state gets involved, so like on the back foot catching up, but it's from the groundswell of charities at the moment. I didn't really answer that question, I don't think, did I?
No, it's helpful because the rest of us kind of like looking at it from maybe a slightly broader perspective, but you focused in on Oscar. There is an issue. If Oscar is going to be taking on a greater role, then what would that mean for Oscar itself? And does it have the capacity?
Yeah.
Does it have the knowledge?
I'm trying to think of what more could they do other than communicate better with what they do and use their data, which they don't do.
And they are collecting a huge amount of data. And part of the current consultation is very much about what they do with that data and how they organize it. And that's certainly an area which I think we should all take seriously. I don't think it's just a given that because they say they want to build a database, it's like, oh, fine, go ahead and do it. We've got to think about what that means in society. What does that imply? There's all sorts of considerations when you pull information together like that, and a lot of responsibility comes with that as well. But this all takes us into the next conversation, which is the one that Paul's going to lead about stakeholders.
Yep, I'm just looking forward to seeing all your drawings, see what they look like. So as we're in smaller groups today, what I've done is I've put on each table 2 of these profile sheets and persona sheets. And what we're going to try and do is really investigate and chart what each of people's expectations, views, and opinions are of charities across Scotland. So each of these will have an audience group already filled in. And this one, for example, is the private sector. This one has members of the public, and there'll be 2 different ones over there, and 1 over here as well. And what I'd like you to do in your groups is probably split up into 2 per profile and have a discussion about who this person is, give them some details, what their age is, what their name is, their biography, have a little draw of what they're like. And now we need to go through these 3 questions or 3 statements here to really capture what you think this individual's view might be of charities in Scotland. So the first box is see and hear about charities. The second one is think and feel about charities. And the third one is expect of charities. And some of you may have used this kind of technique before, things like service design and so on. This isn't a robust, rigorous process. There's only 4 profiles or 5 profiles here. You're not going to be able to capture everyone in Scotland. But what I hope it does do is just open the conversation a little bit more and delve a little bit deeper into what members of the public or what government might think of charities in 2019. So we've got about, what's the agenda? We've got about 25 minutes on this. So what we'll do is we'll spend about 15 minutes on the profiles, and then we'll come back, go around, see everyone's throws,
and hear a little bit more about what you've been saying in terms of what people's expectations are of charities in Scotland in 2019. Does that all make sense? Brilliant. So I think it's perfect actually. Two, and two over here as well. Brilliant. Get drawing. What's that? That one's not.
Paul say that there's a,
We can choose.
from what?
What kind?
Oh, I thought you gave us.
Oh, did you give us
Yeah,
one?
this one's just a member of the public.
This one's just a
Yeah.
member of the public.
So do we want to take a Daily Mail reader or?
We have to draw a picture here.
I think you should just do the order we. Yeah.
Which one?
You want us to draw a picture here, don't you?
Yeah. No, it's not the most important, but I think it does that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's so much you can draw as well, but
You want me, nobody mentioned it, that group of people that I don't charity. Yeah. I want to take you on your charity. I don't look up to myself. You know, that's I think, yeah, I mean, negative thing about charities, like Victorian,
yeah, and like I said, this is not going to capture but probably something we look at longer term as part of our broader work that SEO does around this. It's about trying to make it as possible. This is more of just helping us think about it.
Man or a woman? I've done this for a while. I didn't understand But she's not happy. She's not
What did I say about
charity.
that? That was just something that came to mind when you were speaking.
My hair.
People don't always see positive light the reasons they do. Yes. Then you get dialogue, constantly charity shouldn't exist, state do it all. Maybe you remember that long.
Oh, aye. Oh, yes.
Probably in 10 12 minutes.
Particularly as though she wouldn't have any charity. So she might shop in charity shops. Exactly.
Maybe that is that. Maybe that is linked to the person.
Well,
So how shopping charity shops?
right, so that's how she hears about charity shops. She hears about charity shops, and let's face it, it's plentiful. Most people shop in charity shops. And that's one good thing, charity shops is to a large extent.
So many more close.
It's much. It's a good thing.
Yeah, it's really good environment.
At least from, if you're not a shop owner on the high street, who isn't a charity shop. They get really annoyed. Beverly, she knows about charity through charity shops. Oh, I see Mary. What age is she? What's her name?
Oh.
That's not a very 36-ish name. If she's 36, she's called Kate, or Megan, or Natalie, or
What makes you think about them? Barbara Kate. She's crazy bad.
Barbara would be 56. Names go in generation.
Yeah, I think someone the 36. Yeah, 56.
And where does she live? Bigger. Bigger and bigger. London's big, but bigger.
Yeah, that's right.
What does she do? Teacher. She's absolutely at the end of the tether. Can't wait.
She's got another.
approach. One, get me started, I don't want to teach it. Right.
Maybe think more about what our values are.
She will have done a big game.
Yeah, passionate views in the power of education.
So we're not anxious, not anti-charity.
No.
I thought we started off with anti-charity.
Yeah, we changed it,
not
because
that way.
I couldn't draw someone who looked like that.
It's not something that's a charity like that, but something you absolutely do with every single cell.
Yeah. Yeah.
She money?
Which is
Yeah, yeah.
Mum's physics.
It's your Barbara.
So that's a name of that generation.
Yeah. She's a maths.
Power of education. Passionate believer in the power of education. Believes that people should try and pull themselves up by the bootstraps, but there will always be some on it.
I genuinely wanted to have a conversation in a taxi with the taxi driver who asked me what I do and tried to explain. And he genuinely believes there were about 30 charities in the UK.
Not 30.
Yeah, his life is big corporates and that's it.
I've been down on last week, just think passionately about getting in taxis a lot of places, and he was that question. Yeah, what are you doing? And I say, what are charities? Volunteer. Well, I think yeah, it's the public's view, I guess, on the idea that you can be employed.
That video was just about something with the 100, you know, 100,000.
Yeah,
25.
Yeah.
So calm. Got a whole life story there. Tell us about.
I kind of want to meet
I
Barbara.
just said that she thinks that people should pull themselves up by the bootstraps if they can, but if they can't, there will always be some that can't, and we should feel sorry for them.
Right.
It's just going to be a little bit,
It's fine. Yeah. What does she see and hear about charities then? We've got charity shops.
and she's probably interested in what you call it, children need.
Yeah.
They're getting a bit of bother, aren't they?
No, yeah.
Oh, really?
Yes, Stacey Doolan. Some flat, being the patronising place, white, going to Africa. Lots of black children. I mean, I'm not dead, very healthy, but I think that was a bit. Stacey Doolan.
It's like a documentary.
But the spoof documentaries, something.
Yeah, some of them are, but she's really good. She's really good journalist.
I bet she's got a direct debit to Alzheimer's Scotland because of the mum.
Yeah.
She gives them 20 quid a month.
If I can spell it. Oh.
20.
Teacher.
ALZH.
Yeah.
EINRS.
It's okay, don't worry, I won't. I won't take a look. What do you think she hears about charities?
I think she believes in sort of community action. So if the community hall puts on a jumble sale, she'd be helping. She'd be volunteering her time to raise money for the local scout group, that type of thing. But the idea that her recycling is going to get by some social enterprises contracted to sell council is completely.
And she'll say, services from the council wants to involve in them. So she's a teacher.
She'll see that.
And she'll probably be at a certain level quite resistant to charities getting involved in what she sees as professionally protected and regulated. Yeah, it's like teaching. We don't want any volunteer teachers.
Well, does she see charities coming to the school?
As long as they're not trying to be real teachers.
Indeed.
So I think that should be suspicious of a creeping deprofessionalisation of certain. I've just made it up.
I imagine
Certain jobs by volunteers from charity, volunteers or just lower paid people who work for charities.
I imagine though she would also have obviously schools, they have collections, don't they? They put on events. And
on the surface it will be quite positive.
And they'll probably have people come into the school that might help her with explaining difficult issues to young people. So that kind of stuff is really welcome, I guess. Again, not really knowing where that comes from there. No, just we'll contact an organisation.
And because she's got a direct debit, she's read in the press about the scandals, mainly down south, about charities holding onto people's private data and ringing them 24 times a week.
Yeah.
You know, and that poor woman, that elderly woman, committed suicide because she was overwhelmed.
Yes. So I think she's got some feelings about that. I've met Barbara.
Well, you were very quick to offering the name. Yeah, I'm wondering. Yes.
It's my default woman's name as well.
I often find with this activity that there is someone people have in mind when they're describing.
So she would encourage someone to come in and talk about water aid, something like that.
Yeah.
That's far away.
Yep. You know, that's funny though, because my 6-year-old, that was his first introduction to charities. Water aid at school. So the school talked about charity water aid.
School, if you don't mind me asking.
Sorry?
Is it an Edinburgh school?
East Lothian.
It's just that I happen to know from one or two friends, but there's quite a, I don't quite know why, but there's a quite strong relationship between water aid in Edinburgh and certain places in Africa where they.
But it's interesting, isn't it? That is how my 6-year-old first understood what charity meant. So I asked him, do you know what charity is? You know, your dad works in charity. And he was like, oh, water aid. You work for water aid.
The right to clean water is charitable, is it? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting that that's the introduction. I think, you know, looking at things like the sustainable development goals is a really good example of being taught in schools right now. But it's a real shift from, I still think it's being taught and discussed in kind of what's happening elsewhere in the world rather than what's happening at home.
Yes.
And I think that maybe people's perceptions of charities about helping the less fortunate who
so it's something
are
that
overseas and not here.
happens,
Did you have a teacher called Barbara in school when you were?
happens more
Well, we
abroad.
don't know, do we?
than
Well,
here.
Miss So-and-so and Miss So-and-so.
Give me 3 or 4 more minutes on this.
If
Didn't
you
know
were,
her first name.
if Barbara was working class and we'd made her a school dinner lady or a cleaner or something, and she lived in Craigmillar, I think this would have been slightly different. Because I think there's aren't we stereotyping widely? I think that is something that a lot of middle class people charity, although they know at a certain, they know like if it happens in the UK, they're much more comfortable thinking about it happening in Norway, particularly in third world or developing world countries.
Yeah. Rather than a rich city. Yeah.
And I think, you know, this is there's a lot of stereotyping that goes into something like this, and that's kind of okay.
Because actually, that's another way that Barbara will come across. If she lived not in Bigham, well, I was going to say homeless people sleep on the street. There won't be many of them in Bigham.
Maybe notices when she goes to the city.
She will come up
Is that
for
probably
John
even more
Lewis.
then? Yeah.
Come up for John Lewis.
Do you know it's even more, I guess?
It's a big Marks and Spencer. What does she expect of Charities?
They're going to spend her £20 a month.
That they will spend it properly. Alzheimer's Scotland. Spend. Oh no, we've got the direct debit. Spend her £20 per month. Properly. Prudently.
Probably wanting to, yeah, I guess linked to that is wanting to know that £20 is going towards. I think often people don't want people to hear that that money's going towards things like travel and staff costs, and although we know that, yeah, we know that that's important to running a charity, but that is
there's a real cognitive dissonance there, isn't there, between people who give money to research charities, thinking that they're trying to solve cancer, but not realising that you're paying for really well-paid medical people to look into microscopes.
Yeah,
you know, that's a staff cost, isn't it? You know, and people don't think that through, do they? It's really bizarre sometimes when you talk to folks about those sort of connections that they haven't made in their own heads.
And at the same time, when people give money to charities, they don't expect the charities just to give all the money they gave to the individual.
No.
Do they? And yet, when you take that argument that we should be going to the front line,
yes, what does that mean?
That in effect, if you were to kind of take away all the staff costs and all the overheads, that is what you would be doing. You'd be giving it to the individual.
Yeah, and then the number of places you walk, somebody's having a collection for little Sally to be taken to Disney World. That can't be charitable as it's a named individual. Right, you know, it's
looking forward to this.
What did we write down earlier? Impossible.
I think she'll also think that charities will be the big safety net. Not
a benevolent blanket.
That will just deal with all the homeless people.
Is she guilty?
But yes, I'm in this bit. You can't get to it. Especially if she's on
Paul, you take that. Oh, you take me.
Used to this. Right, I'm going to start with Anna's group here first. If you can just tell us a little bit about your persona that you've drawn up.
Well, we've got a real person.
Yeah.
Because we had government. So we just picked Eileen Campbell and drew a picture of her. Though we did realise she was probably not totally representative of government because she kind of gets it and she's pretty committed. Whereas, you know, so we chucked in a few more cynical things into the persona. So the seeing here about charities, we think she's got an active interest, but she also sees photo opportunities. She thinks they make a great contribution to communities, but they're always after money. Only seeing here about issues within their own portfolio. So she's got a wide perspective, but other ministers would have very much. Or they then see stuff in their own constituency, which could be different. So there's that tension between the national and the local and the information that they get. Think and feel, we think she would want to be able to do more, but it's hard to compete between to prioritise between the competing demands. So everybody that comes to her has got a noble cause, was how we would put it. So how can she distinguish amongst that? She can't control it. Other ministers can control their sector. She can't control that sector. And you had a really good example where sectarianism got a lot of attention at one point, and now knife crime's getting a lot of attention, and it's whatever's in the public eye suddenly becomes the political thing that everybody looks at. And not to say those things aren't important, but ministers can get a bit distracted by the thing of the moment. And then charities have to, to get funding and to get work and whatever, they kind of have to run along behind that, or those charities then become flavour of the month and others miss out. What she would expect? She would expect charities to be able to quantify what they're doing for the money that they get, to be an authentic and expert voice, to be more collaborative in what they do and avoid duplication, and probably to make more of a difference. Yes. Thank you.
It's not
me this time. So we had the audience group as a service user. We kind of looked at that and considered that that could be anywhere on the spectrum. I come from a mental health charity, so that you could really be talking about anybody from a young person up to somebody in their 70s. So we decided to focus on a young person between the ages of 18 to 25. We've given them the name Joe, and that can be female or male. Their location was Glasgow and they were a student. The bio notes that we put down is that they're a young student away from home for the first time, no previous experience of engaging with a charity. They come from a stable family background, but they're having a crisis and they need to access mental health service. So where would they see and hear about charities? They might hear about it in Freshers Week, online from their peers. They might do volunteering through RAG days. They might come into contact with chuggers, which is a new phrase I have learned today. They might go to the GP and hear about services there. It might be the student union, media, student press, or they might hear about it through the poor media that sometimes charities can get for various different reasons. How do they think and feel about charities? Well, they might think it's for people who are less fortunate than themselves. Remember, we've said this person comes from a stable family background. They might be embarrassed to need help from a charity. They might just think that the market is so crowded that they have no idea where to begin. And what they might expect from charities might be help, it might be solutions, it might be information signposting. They might not expect to have to pay. They might not expect charities to have paid staff. They might not expect a charity to help them in the first place. But they might also be looking for immediate help. So those are some of the things that we came up with. And there is no, looking there.
So we had the private sectors and trying to develop in some senior manager in the banking sector. See here with charities causes goes to the staff's own interests and situation. The big charities, constant kind of advertising on the telly and newspapers. Also, I suppose the bad things as well that happen. Also may have set up a bunch of kind of direct debits for a number of charities to kind of support and then kind of forgotten about it. Also the company's kind of sponsorship events, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, in terms of this senior management then manages a team who have the opportunity to contribute time to a charitable cause that they can choose. So that's where they might have heard of charities from their staff interests. They would see charity, we started off cynically and then it got a bit better. They see a charity as a marketing opportunity that can be written off against tax. It provides good PR to the banking sector. And then we also thought there might be a bit of a genuine desire to do good and contribute personally or through the organisation.
Might be.
Yeah, might be.
I mean, I also said there's a way to kind of mitigate against the crippling guilt of being in the financial sector.
In terms of what they might expect of charities, they would expect to see their contribution either made visible or not made visible, depending on what the agreement would be. They would expect to have a professional relationship with the charity and to have a trusted relationship with the charity. They would expect to see positive results and a measurable impact coming out of their contribution. And they may expect charities to be able to and to be seen to be providing public services.
Great.
Do you want to see our drawing?
Oh, yeah, fantastic. Yeah, sorry. Oh, I've got a full body one.
Yeah. It wasn't me.
We've got a lovely drawing of a guy sitting on a couch reading his paper.
This would be a tabloid reader.
It is a tabloid reader, yes. Tabloid reader. He's 58. His name's Jim McSporn. He comes from Glasgow. He's a builder, and he left school, went to college, and did an apprenticeship.
but he's faced unemployment in the past when the crash happened thanks to the financial sector. He plays football regularly with his kids and he likes to drink with his mates. The things he sees and hears about charities, he sees scandalous stories about the charity failings in the paper. He hears his friends complain about being approached in the street to donate, and he's aware of and donates to children in need, and he buys a lottery ticket every week.
He thinks and feels that charities are run by volunteers and that they shouldn't spend money on buildings, admin and running costs. He's possibly not aware that he's used a charity in the past, for example, his Citizens Advice Bureau when he faced unemployment, or youth football teams with his kids or grandkids. He's more likely to support local causes, for example, putting a donation in a food bank collection in his local supermarket. And what he expects of charities, to provide everything for free, not to contact him for any money, and not to do any bad stuff, for example, exploitation scandals that were in the papers around service users or staff.
We threw that one in just to kind of show the difference in what people's views might be of charity. I think it's really clear. And
well, our audience group was the public, so the general public. So we picked Barbara, who's 56 and lives in Biggar, and she's a teacher. She's a passionate believer in the power of education. She believes that people should pull themselves up by the bootstraps if they can, but there will always be some who can't, and we should feel sorry for them. She also believes in community action by participating herself in, what was it you said, in the Scouts, local Scouts, the Jungle Scouts. She sees and hears about charities through charity shops and children in need and comic relief on television. She makes a direct debit every month to Alzheimer's Scotland because of her dad, was it? And she's also, of course, heard about charities through negative news stories. And she sees homeless people on the street when she comes up to Edinburgh to go shopping at John Lewis.
John Lewis,
We decided. No. What does she think and feel about charities? She's suspicious of a creeping deprofessionalisation of certain jobs that are perhaps being done by volunteers or low-paid charity workers. Whilst, of course, on the surface, she's very positive about charities and she encourages their role and participation in her school where appropriate, for example, with water aid. But she generally feels, although she knows that charity does start at home, that it's something that happens more abroad, a bit more comfortable with that. And what she expects of charities is that Alzheimer's Scotland will spend her £20 a month prudently and properly, and not on taxes and huge salaries, and that they will act as a safety net in general for those poor people that she trips over when she's on her way to job.
Brilliant, thank you. It's really interesting to hear all of those personas. As I said before, we've only discussed 5, and that doesn't cover everyone, and it can't. But what I hope it does is hearing different views and perspectives is after we have a quick coffee break, is when we come back to identifying some of the key challenges that we face and try and come up with some solutions to those challenges as well, is that we're thinking about other people's perspectives a little bit more and not just ours, the things that we bring to the table, but actually what are the real concerns of the different groups across Scotland, and what are the things that they see really positively about charities as well, all doom and gloom. So yeah, help yourself to coffee out there, and we'll come back in 10 minutes.
So, do you think that was the
apparently there is an issue with the work today. So as I say, I hope they found that last session quite useful to kind of really kind of see things through different eyes, really. And hopefully this will help you in this next section. We're going to spend about 5 to 10 minutes right now in our group around the table. And very simple, all I'm looking for you to do is to use the sheet that's on here, this big circle with challenges on it. And I want you to write down as many of the challenges you can think of that our sector, the charity sector, faces in terms of maintaining and building trust in the charity brand. And I know some of us have said, well, charity brand may not be possible. So if we take charity brand out of it, just think about charities in general. What are the challenges we face in building and maintaining trust in charities or the charity brand? So 5 to 10 minutes, as many done as possible, and then I'll come back and give you some more instructions on what we're going to be doing with that next. Is that
It doesn't retract, it's broken, so I wouldn't like something from it.
Challenges. I think this paper sheet is going to be quite full.
How do you draw infinite?
You volunteer to write.
That's because he can't read my writing.
I suppose the one we've been talking about is what's the word? Tarnish brand. Tarnish brand. Austerity is people. I don't know. Is giving gone down?
Overcoming the tarnish brand.
The challenges.
I think the trend is that there's less people giving more.
Right, but the amount's not going down.
Yeah, the number of people giving. So I'm not quite sure that's 2 years ago stats, but the trend was less people giving more money. So that's why comic relief is spiking.
Am I right then? In Scotland, was it the case that trust in charities is more or less plateau? It didn't go up or down every year. It's 82%.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
So that's not a big challenge.
Well, it's a perception, isn't it? It's like doing something before it gets worse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's also partly driven by the UK picture.
Yes.
So people here want to react because what they're seeing in the UK picture. But then, a lot of the charities that people give to, even in Scotland, are the big name charities that are headquartered and cover the UK, or internationally in some cases. And so, the giving issue is affected by their trust as well.
Diversity. Strength and a weakness. We say that. But
So you mean diversity as in there's so many of them?
At the same time,
It's just such a diverse sector.
Yeah.
Can I also put down blurred boundaries? I think our boundaries are really blurred
Between the public
between
sector
charities and non-charities. So
yeah, it's a big spectrum, isn't it? Like a finishing line.
I mean, you mentioned churches, but what about diversity to the charities?
Yes.
What about governments, organisations like Scottish Ballet and stuff, arts, museums? So many of them are
and some of
government
them,
charities.
some of the real charities, because we think that they're not charities, right? Because we get a block grant every year, which so far has been very valuable.
That's another issue, isn't it? Like high core granted. What was it?
Like dependency.
Not dependency, but organisations that get a high percentage of their income from a single government source.
Well,
That is an issue. Actually. And there's nothing wrong with it, but it's seen as quite.
It's a risk.
Yeah, it is.
What about the sort of race to bottom of those charities that chase contracts?
Yeah.
That chase contracts. They might as well be Group 4 or Circa. Yeah, they just happen to be called mental health or us. So that's what we do, we just go around taking the contracts from IJBs and.
I wish that I could wave magic wand and change the self-perception of charities and people who run charities to be more aware of the importance of where they sit in the bigger picture.
Okay.
I don't know how you can reduce that.
There's no one.
Oh.
Finding trustees. See what's that? Finding trustees. Oh my God, yeah, concerns about the historical abuse. That's again links to the tarnishing of a charity brand, isn't it? Historical abuse and stuff like that. Increasing regulation and control. Actually, that is quite important, isn't it? Increasing regulation, because it is, because that's the way government is responding to the needy, is to increase regulation and control.
Which is really what the thing is about.
That is effectively, in my view, the Oscar stuff that's come to Scotland is basically a response to scandals. And finding the space to campaign. I would reframe that as campaigning space being squeezed. And that's an international phenomenon. It's actually been measured internationally. Campaigning space being squeezed. There's less kind of, it's not as easy anymore to kind of campaign because it's being shut down by governments and media and everything else. It's a space where you can actually go and campaign. In fact, in some countries, people have been jailed for it. Here, we got gagging clauses and stuff like that. So, yeah.
What about the petitions committee mechanism? I suppose if you're in Scottish Government, you say, oh, we've got quite a lot of means. Because I did use that for something, and it took best part of 2 years.
Did it work?
To be honest, I don't know because I've done on something else by the time it came round. But they did get in touch with me.
You feel that's a challenge in Scotland?
I'm not disputing your point. I suppose I'm.
In terms of the petition stuff, you feel there's a challenge?
Well, I think if I was a government minister at the moment, I'd say, oh, that's obviously the petitions committee. Anyone can take a petition. Anyone can campaign. Who wants to campaign can take a petition.
But can I say that I don't think that's actually, I don't find that a problem in Scotland. I think the politicians are generally, the national level are generally quite supportive of campaigning. And at the local level as well, they're generally supportive of campaigning, although I do sense sometimes they get that kind of concerned about representative they should be going through the council system. But exactly, yeah. But I don't find it. But maybe this is why I'm picking up on what you said. That whether there is a concern that we are being pushed back in campaigning in Scotland.
Well, I'm not really. I don't think I can properly respond to that because I don't think I've got the right experience. I do think that consulted to death.
Yes.
And I put that as a
Right, we should just have a big
consultation.
Poor government, I think, is a challenge.
That's a really interesting debate taking place. And carry on. What I would like you to do now.
Oh, does, yes.
I'll put instances of poor government.
Yes, and over consulted.
What I would like you to do now in your group is to. As adults, I'm sure we can come to an agreement of what our priority challenge would be we want to focus on. Now, that's going to be the challenge that we look at and go through and take forward to try and find some solution to. The question for all of you, though, first is, would you prefer to do this as a group on your table, or would you prefer to be split up into pairs to focus on this instead? Because originally there were a lot more people here to focus on a few more issues, but it's what people feel comfortable with. In your table, you don't have to tell me what you feel comfortable with. Everyone's friend. Is have a discussion amongst you,
couple of minutes, maybe 3 or 4, depending on how easy it is. And choose your priority strategy you'd like to take forward to focus on and to share with the room in the next 80 minutes. So a few minutes.
looks like this.
Mhm.
And you say this. This is what I work from the next 25
Right,
minutes.
what we do.
This is split into 5
Do
sections,
that one.
and each heading, the headings
What's the
are
problem
the main
with
areas that you need to follow, but I also provided some text under each kind of give a steer for some things that should be included when you're discussing
I feel a little bit more
you
passionate about this.
pick. The first one, very straightforward. What is the challenge that you have picked? What are the myths and barriers that are preventing change? Why would it matter to define and protect the charity brand? Second one, your vision. So what is the solution? This includes your goal as well as the reason it's important. What is your long-term vision and how does achieving this contribute to your vision? Strategy, what are you asking Oscar, SCEO, government or other stakeholders to do and how will it help? They also need to understand their role in your strategy and how their action will help bring about change. So although we've been talking about Oscar today, we've also mentioned about the state as well. So we can think much more broadly than just the regulator here, including SCEO's role or even our own organisations. Call to action, what needs to change to meet the goal, to meet this vision that you want to achieve? Who has the power to make that change? Links into the strategic point. Describe how you think change will come about. And finally, what does success look like? How does this fit also into the larger conversation about the future of the civil society and the third sector? And what value do we want to convey, and what kind of community brand for charities do we want to create? And like I said, what will success look like? So you can start off with the challenge. I hope you will pick the challenge now. I reckon you have. I know Alice will pick the challenge.
Okay, join you guys now.
Sure.
But you can go with the
text. We touched earlier on the
That's fine, just
questions and just ask me.
we touched earlier on the
conversations. Some have already started.
lack of awareness some charities have about the strategic importance of their role within, say, something like the health and social care integration agenda. And rather than, it's a lack of self-awareness as an organisation, I don't necessarily mean by individuals, of where they fit, that diminishes their power in the negotiating procedures.
I didn't get that. Can you see that again?
So,
Give an example.
Give an example. In Dumfries and Galloway, the Health and Social Care Partnership has got a whole partnerships and IJB. It's got 9 performance indicators that it has to meet locally in order to achieve the 9 national indicators. And they can't achieve some of them because of things like bed block in hospitals.
Yeah.
And some of the charities that could help with that, like the food train, the befriending charities, social care charities, community transport initiatives. Some of them are very switched off, but some of them do not get that the Health and Social Care Partnership needs them more than the charity needs the Health and Social Care Partnership to do what they have to do.
Yeah.
At this point in this trajectory, the Health and Social Care Partnership doesn't understand how much they need them. They just, because they've not done this before, this integration stuff. So they're just counter.
But you know, there's 2 things that strike me from what you just said there. One is that I wonder whether there's people within the Health and Social Care Partnership who actually realise that.
That's right, they don't.
And the second thing is the way we're talking about it, as though Health and Social Care Partnership is all the statutory, and the charities
I'm very,
are
absolutely, and I'm very conscious that I may even have expressed it, but that realisation has penny has dropped with me, and I now actively remind at IJB meetings and other various forums and groups that I sit
Anybody
on.
will listen.
Anybody will listen. That we are not, my job is not to build a bridge between the sector and the Health and Social Care Partnership. My job is to be a partner in the Health and Social Care Partnership on behalf of the third sector. And so, yes, we're all on a journey on that. But my point is more to do with the sector itself, that it does not always appreciate how much leverage it has, and still sees itself going to the NHS with a cap, saying please put money in this cap. And when they don't, they get all annoyed and upset because they feel a little bit entitled to it because they've got it in the past. And I wish I could raise that level of awareness, of self-organisation, self-awareness, so that they would even have the upper hand in certain situations with some of the strategists in the partnership.
Is there an identity issue there then, in terms of self-identity?
I think
because if there is, then that links completely to the charity brand or the charity.
Yes, it does, but it's much more from within rather than outside looking in.
It's self-defining rather than being defined.
Yes.
Yeah, that's helping.
So the challenge is how do you get charity people who work and volunteer in charities that potentially could be, and I don't just mean about drawing down more money, it's about playing a much more significant role in service provision. I can only talk with any knowledge about my own area, but I imagine it's true. I've been setting as well. Maybe how it's going to be. Because these agencies can't do what they've been charged to do because things are changing so quickly. The local authority especially, it's just got no money.
So the challenge, so we're looking at
so raising awareness within the sector about its own power. Yeah, it is about power. And role, strategic role.
Strategic role in things like health, social care, and housing.
Is that because we as a society value budgets rather than value social connection, social influence more?
I wonder, it might be that, but I wonder if it doesn't actually, if we're not actually at a point in the development of the third sector where we're on a head-on collision between traditionally what the third sector has represented and the role it's played into one which is much more muscular and much more important. And some of them get it, some of them do it. But the public isn't even ready for some of that. And the public work in councils and hospitals and planning departments and all these things.
There's some parts of the sector, housing associations, all of which are charities now.
Yes.
They didn't all used to be charities before, many of them were not before. And they have become so powerful now that FOI legislation has been extended to them.
Well, yes, if you get public funding, isn't that the case? If you get public funding, you're subject to it. No, it's only local authorities, isn't it?
Well, if you get public funding, then say from a local authority subject to that.
Yes.
In this case, the housing association itself is subject to FOI and has to go to rules. They can't say, oh, go to our funder.
No.
That's the difference. But they have become quite powerful and some of them quite massive.
What was that I said? What was the challenge? Raising awareness within the sector to
its own leverage and power.
Yes.
And there's Sue's put something through as well. Building confidence in the sector.
And confidence. And raising awareness and confidence.
And of course, being able to communicate why we are playing such an important role, which Sue's saying the evidence and the extent of that sector. That's difficult though, isn't it? But crucial.
That's a challenge.
Yeah. Sue, I think your microphone was working, wasn't it, Sue? If you want to unmute, then feel free to unmute and speak as well.
it is also about building confidence in the sector and also presenting the evidence of the extent of the third sector's role.
Just going to put the volume up. Okay, Sue, you can speak now.
Does it work? Is it working?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Can you hear me? Right, okay. That's probably easier because I'm rubbish at typing.
Sorry.
Right, I've got that.
So do you want to just elaborate a bit on that, Sue?
Well, I don't know, my sense is that everybody still thinks that the third sector role is fairly peripheral in these issues, and that actually what we need to do is we need to start collating what that picture really is. That may have already been done, but I'm not sure that I've seen it.
Explain what, I don't quite follow. Explain what you mean to.
Sorry, I'm thinking about, if we're talking about health and social care partnerships,
Yeah.
you know, the public sector partners, certainly where I am, behave as if they're the major providers. And my sense is they probably aren't entirely. And there are key areas, as has been suggested, that the third sector actually are, you know, providing life and limb and fairly significant amounts of services. But somehow we don't.
Yeah, what's the statistic? Is it 60 or 70% of health and social care public services are provided by the third sector? Because of contracting and outsourcing.
I think this is
It's an enormous stat, yeah.
I don't know, come across any stats of that.
Absolutely, it's huge.
our sector across the piece, you know, even if we look at the recent economic strategy, employment strategy, and the fact that the third sector does even make it into that. And I think there is an issue around the third sector being kind of seen as this, you know, the final sector, the one social care.
It is social care, not NHS, yeah. Social care.
Because they don't collect that stat sometimes on some of the other more specific. Sorry, they collect in very specific services, but they don't collect it across the piece. And so, you know, when it comes to things like social care at home, like, sorry, not social care, adult social care in care homes or at home, we get those stats. But what we don't get is like the other kind of support, whether it's to carers or it's to health, organizations, all the other stuff. So it's difficult.
And I take your point, but I think I was coming at this particularly about the perception, the self-perception of the sector itself, rather than from outside, because I think that's actually adding to the problem.
Yeah.
If we don't have a clear and confident view of ourselves, then why would anybody else?
But why would we have a clear and confident view of ourselves if we're so diverse?
I think it's possible to have a clear and confident view about what your organisation, whatever it is, is set up to do.
But in terms of the wider charity brand.
Yes, but then that relies upon those organisations to step outside themselves and be strategic.
Yes.
And that's forever struggling.
That has to have, that's the kind of change, the cultural shift that we all want in the sector is going to come from hundreds and thousands of small organisations, small, medium, large organisations going, we need to stop doing that, whatever it is, and we need to stop doing it. When we go to these meetings, I still am surprised when I go to meetings and I hear people around the table, certainly in the local authority, who have virtually no staff left to do public consultation. They've got 2 people left in CRD. And the third sector is, there's probably about 20 organisations in Dumfries and Galway, ourselves included, who can do community engagement. And yet, that shift in around the table has not happened. I mean, it's there, it's coming, but the council still sees itself as, well, we're the ones who are in charge here, and we've got the contract, and we know where everybody is, and we've got this and that and the next thing, and you're here to help us do that. Instead of actually, it's completely the other way around. Those organisations sitting around the table have, if they were to take just a slight shift in self-attitude and attitude towards each other, could go into that meeting saying, right, we're going to do your community engagement. We propose to do it like this. Does that work?
Invest in us.
And invest in us. But don't go in cap in hand saying, we need your money, give us a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here, a little bit here.
But it's difficult, isn't it? Because we've got an intricate ecosystem of charities and voluntary organizations supporting each other.
Yeah.
If one of them doesn't get the next round of funding, that ecosystem gets damaged. I mean, like take the example of the community hall. A community hall could get money for next year, right? So it doesn't go cap in hand. Then all the other services that do rely on that for hosting their activities, well, it doesn't matter if they get money because they'll lose out because they haven't got the space to do it.
I totally get that, and my argument doesn't apply at every level. I think it applies particularly at I don't know what level, how to put it. In my terms, it would be at regional level. And not national, although yes, it could ultimately build up to national, but I'm talking about organisations that can actually enable the big public sector agencies to do what they need to do. But I just wish they would go about it less.
Another 10 minutes on this.
Easily. Is that right?
Yeah. You know, at the moment, quite a lot of public sector officials will tend to think in terms of what do we buy from the sector?
Yes.
They're trying to buy outcomes, and if you're lucky, it's outcomes and outputs.
Yes.
But that whole idea is, which then fuels competitive tendering.
Yes,
it's based on a kind of, this is what we want to do, you know, rather than what.
Into marketisation.
Yeah. But you could turn it around the other way and say, look, charities and the people that they support coming together and saying, this is what we want to do. Do you believe in what we're trying to do? Invest in us. Rather than, this is what we're going to sell to you. Because at the moment we do, you know, we either go cap in hand, or we go and say, look, you know, what do you want to buy from us? You know, we're trying to sell something, whereas it shouldn't be about selling to the state. It should be about the state supporting the sector.
Well, of course, a lot of this would have been simplified if government just decided to co-fund us to do their health and social care partnership stuff instead of, you know.
So I guess what
that doesn't address that.
What we want to see though is a more self-confident sector that's able to sell itself and pitch itself.
Not sell,
Not sell, but
you know what I mean? To get people to invest.
Yeah. But my sense is any movement in terms of the kind of collective. My sense is any movement in terms of that relies on people having some kind of collective idea about what they're doing. And I think for too long, organizations have been divided and ruled. So in that sense, that's really tricky to establish, because people have got so used to negotiating for their own little bit of the pie rather than a collective part of the pie.
It's true.
And there's a shared sense of identity as a charity, like help that or hinder that. Do people want to? I mean, at the moment you've got like social enterprise movement, right? And people who identify to that are saying, look, we're social enterprises, we're not traditional charities. So even within our own sector, people are trying to divide themselves away. Is that because there's something about the charity brand that suggests that it is all about cap in hand, it is a social care mentality, and that people it might, the effort is to try and reclaim that brand, which is what we're talking about here. But for others, it's like, let's distance ourselves from that brand completely.
People have also been encouraged to think about themselves in different ways because there are different funding streams. So, you know, there's money comes for social enterprise, there's money comes for whatever. So I think people are encouraged to differentiate themselves as well.
They are, yeah. And there's different strategies.
Yeah, and I think equally, you know, most people don't have a clue what the third sector means.
Yeah, I think that is the reason why government has started using the term third sector to describe the activity.
Well, even today I've been struggling with getting my terminology right between charities and third sector. There is an issue.
The third sector means nothing.
I don't even say it anymore. People say, what do you do then? What's this new job you've got? And I start to say, well, I'm chief exec, third sector, don't listen.
Just say you're a train driver, I don't.
No, do you know what I say? I say, either I say, if it's Edinburgh, I say, you know what EVOC does? And they go,
Not really.
So we do what EVOC does. Or if it's in Dumfries, I say, we're an umbrella organisation that looks after the voluntary sector. That seems to.
So how do we go about this? Well,
Right, a strategy,
no,
what are we
fascinating,
asking
interesting.
Oscar's SCO and government to do?
Well,
How
you
will
have
it help?
Individual
Or others.
organisations, you talk about small actions, small actions from individual organisations, is there something that's quite best to do? Working with TSIs?
There's something about peer support, there's something about being able to, I don't know, promote markets and win some successes in countering your suggestions.
Some of my thinking, if I'm honest, about this has come to, hi Sue, it's Norma here, I should have said hello earlier. Sue and I were at a meeting last, oh no, that was, you weren't at the Wednesday meeting, were you?
No, it was at the Thursday one.
Yeah, sorry, I'm getting done. I was at a meeting last Wednesday with all the chief, or some of the chief execs of the TSIs, and so some of my thinking is influenced by this. There's no question that there needs to be, if we as a network are to facilitate the third sector to do this, then we need to do it ourselves, if we are seen as the interface. So it would help to have a network or chief officer, TSI network, whoever's involved, that is properly facilitated. I'm always hesitant to say the answer is money. I don't think it is in itself the answer, but we do need resource to create the network. That's just not ever going to happen the way things are spontaneously. It's just not.
Could we set up a base camp?
I think it needs a little bit more than that. I think it does need something, it needs some facilitation. Whether SCVO would be the right organisation, I don't know. But we need something that says, look, you've got 12 months. Here's some money. Get sorted into some kind of structure that where you've got 3 priorities, not 23, 3 that you're all signed up to, and then you follow through.
But to
And
get
actually,
to
you know what?
get to that stage,
You know
it's
what?
quite a journey, isn't it?
You know what? Well, yes, it is.
Like you, I guess.
That's right. At the end of that year, we need a plan, and that plan cannot be to Scottish Government or to anyone. Give us 150,000 a year. I would rather start this year by putting an application to the Robertson Trust or a completely different funding source to get independent funding that we have to be responsible for, and we have to manage, and we have to define what we do with it, and then at the end of it we come back and say, here's what we want. Rather than always going, can we have some of that money that we're supposed to? Oh, bloody God. Now, just suggesting that, because I did suggest it went right in the middle of the floor.
But maybe there needs to be a conversation, like you said earlier, about that confidence building between the TSI chief execs that we can do this as a collective.
Well, we can't seem to do it. Sorry, I'm not linked to this.
What's the, for me, that sounds like a perfect idea, strategy, and it's giving you a short space of time to prove a point that actually long-term funding for this will work. What are the objections to that?
I just didn't sense from the objections. Well, nobody objected, but nobody ran with it. We went with what the strongest voices in the room. Mine was pretty strong, but I'm new. So we went with other voices.
I'm conscious, Norma, this maybe isn't a discussion for a live YouTube session, but there are organizations, but there are organizations that, that would facilitate bringing, people together to build confidence and then agree a joint agenda. I don't think it's, I agree with you, it's not that complicated.
So I guess the strategy then is about finding a space where that joint agenda can be taken forward and down. I guess it's, you know, it's like anything, you've only had those initial conversations, then things do something like that. But it's about.
I think what's clear is the audience for that in the first instance is ourselves. It's not the government. It's not Oscar. It's not whoever supports bodies make it. It's a network building thing. And off the back of that proposition, which can then be taken to be invested in, not purchased, not sold, but invested in.
And I think it's a really important point about having confidence. We need to have confidence in ourselves before we can get the wider sector to feel that way as well. Obviously, there'll be some organisations that are very confident that they do so on, but if the likes of TSIs or SCBO are confident in what we do, what our impact is, and then that happens.
But can I just bring this back a bit, because we've gone very much down the third sector route. Is there space in that for a charity question? Or are we trying to distance ourselves from the charity question?
No, I think the answer to the, well, from my perspective, the answer to in building the confidence of the charity sector is at least partly about building the confidence of the TSI network in Scotland, because that's the mechanism we've got.
I would agree with that.
I would say.
Yeah.
Thank you. So the strategy is that we're going to find a space for a joint TSI-SCBO discussion about what we do in the next 12 months to make this happen.
Well, this is where my proposition was coming then.
Just tell me what to put.
I need to shoot up. I'm stupid about the colours. We only get 3 hours.
Okay, you're coming back then?
Well, we're shooting 30 yards. So let's see. Yeah.
See you soon.
You agree with me too? Thanks very much for
So what I was going to suggest is SCBO has had a lot of success with our online networks. Maybe I need to do this with some. Basically, what we could do is use that channel to create a space.
We talked a lot about this last week, and we have one.
Okay, and is it working?
It's been piloted, and I think there was buy-in last week to make that, to extend that and make that work. So
well, if you got something ready,
I think that is that's given a little bit of time. That will help.
One more minute.
It's more than that.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, everyone's ready. Okay. Brilliant. Okay, I'll come to this table last.
So don't forget to take notes.
Find that useful? Yeah, lots of discussion? No? Yes? Just say yes. Just say yes. Okay, I'm going to come to this table again first. And I just really want you to kind of quickly just give an overview. Not everything is down there if you don't want to, but just a quick overview of the sections that you've got.
Okay, so we didn't choose any of the things that we wrote on the original sheet because we tried to find one thing that combined all of them, which was private schools. And which basically it came down to the answer in every box there's lots more words and they're all really good words, but the answer to all the 5 points is redefine the public benefit test. So the challenge is the integrity of the brand means that charities have to feel charitable. And it's not just about that. At the moment it looks at the benefit to the public, but it doesn't look at the corollary of that, which is you might benefit the public in some way, but look at all the damage that's done. So it doesn't look at the damage as well as looking at the benefit. And that's it probably. So there's lots of things we want to do, but it basically all comes down to holding on to the values, holding on to the brand and public benefit test.
Does anyone have anything they'd like to respond to that, add to, or we all agree?
Can I just say that the conversation around that, which has been taking place across the education and academic circles, about public benefit, public disbenefit.
Mm-hmm.
And
that's a nicer way of saying harm.
Well, it's the techie words they use, but I think to some extent that's the approach, as I understand it, which Oscar took when they were looking for the schools. So they're weighing up, playing fields being made available to the general public in bursaries
against the disbenefit of being exclusive and all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I wonder whether, my own thing is that, Stephen, you feel that this kind of takes it to the next level?
Well, they would be testing against the current test. Whereas what we're saying is this review, the legislative review should redefine the test.
Yeah.
Can I just add, there's an interesting parallel to that in the environmental sector at the moment, because there's a massive discussion going on about the public benefit of agri-environment schemes and what is the public benefit. And the government at the moment is really pushing back against having a public benefit to agri-environment schemes. So there's a really interesting parallel going on.
So in the archers. Agri-forestry. Sorry, that's a...
Right, I'm going to come to this table then now. No, I think who's going to?
Right, so we did what you did, and we rolled all of our challenges into one, which is it's about expectation management. And we were looking at how the challenge that we looked at is differing and unrealistic and competing expectations of stakeholders. And we defined those stakeholders as a starter for 10, this isn't exclusive, as funders, government, service users, boards, volunteers, staff. And then we stopped. And the myths that we looked at were that local funding must be spent locally, charities not having any costs, including reserves, and the need to, and not being able to be innovative. Sometimes charities aren't being seen as needing to be innovative or take risks. The vision is that people understand what charities are capable of and support those activities and the diversity of the sector. In terms of the strategy, we came up with a whole load of strategies that looked at what the charity could do, what OSCA, SCVO and the government could do, and what media could do. We spent a long time looking at the call to action and what the solutions were, and we came up with about 10 different solutions, ranging from promoting positive stories, enabling more effective partnership, having champions within the sector and out with the sector who are doing a bit of cheerleading, having clarity and guidance on what priorities are, using social media more than traditional media perhaps, and building ability to change policy so that you've got a more positive and a sustained direction of travel. In terms of success, we came up with 4 kind of measures of success. One is that service users and communities create political space for change. Then from there, that needed to be communicated to government funders and stakeholders, who were then able to act upon the space, to use the space that's been created and start to deliver change, enabling more people to change. And then we therefore realised we created a virtuous circle. So there you go.
Fantastic. I can't wait to write that.
Good luck.
I should say as well that this stuff will be typed up, and hopefully this is just kind of part of like start the conversation about some of these things, and I can get more people to build on the content of what we've been discussing. Has anyone got anything to respond to that with? Or we're just looking forward to seeing the typed up notes? Okay, final table. Last person down.
Yeah. Well, we finally settled on the challenge of raising awareness and confidence within the sector about its own leverage, its own power, its own strategic role. And linked to that, being able to present evidence of that importance of the work. And we talked a lot about all of that within the context of health and social care, but it doesn't just apply to them. Our visions of a self-confident third sector interface CBO network with a leading a self-confident sector, clear about its contribution, role and its power and a shared sense of identity. And our strategy would be to create the space in the next 12 months for a joint discussion between the TSI network, SCBO, about how we become an effective network. So this is all very convoluted, but by the end of that 12 months, we would have a plan. And ideally, the intervening 12 months would not be funded by Scottish Government or by
we would get away from that relationship, get funding from somewhere else magically. And we would come back at the end of 12 months with a plan that says, here, how, if you invest in us, this is what will happen. This is what we will be able to do. This is how we will be able to lead the third sector in Scotland. So the call to action is to the network itself, to SCDO, and that's where I've got to stop. Well, I didn't run out of time.
No, that's good.
Probably self-evident how it fits in.
Yeah.
Did you want to say anything?
Okay, it's really nice to hear some kind of new ideas coming out, and to share last one there, the value of understanding what our value is and being proud of it and confident about it, and other people not being able to recognise that unless we recognise that ourselves. I hope you found that useful. As I said, we'll take that away, we'll type it up, and we'll put it together. We'll probably go out alongside our actual consultation response as well, which again focus not just on broader issues around charity brand and confidence and trust in that, but also the 10 sections within the consultation, which will be seeking feedback from people on some of the thoughts that we've had internally and some things that have come up in discussions today. I'm going to now hand over to Anna, just to kind of take the reflection session part. And
I suppose I don't know that there's a lot to add really. I'm quite conscious of the time, but probably I think the whole session's been really flexible. I feel like we're reflecting on the law. I think it's been really terribly useful to ask a bit of catharsis in terms of thinking about things, which is always good. I think it has certainly given us more things to think about, and hopefully there'll be some common points that will come out of the table in our responses. Like responses, then that may make a difference to government. What I'm hearing is that government are open to hearing more. It is all about keeping current levels of interpretation, but they do say they're open to hearing about wider issues. I think there are wider issues to highlight them. It is also complicated with the fact that it doesn't need legislative time to look at this stuff. Worst comes to the worst over the next couple of weeks, and legislative time will be taken up at the work. So, but we have to, I think, go in the spirit of hope that we are actually going to make a difference with this. So I think that's been really helpful. I don't think there's much point in saying anything else unless anyone feels there's a great keeping going here. So, no, thank you very much, and thank you for the people that are down the line for sticking with us. So really, that's good. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.